The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome to yet another edition of Friday Night Live with me, Hafiz Sha'ban. This Friday early evening on the 6th of March 2020. Corresponding to the 11th of Rajab 1441. As usual, we are broadcasting live to Luton on 105.1 FM. And nationally, of course, also broadcasting live to some of our sister stations nationally on Sheffield Link FM, Peterborough, Salam, Derby, Nottingham. Internationally, of course, you can tune in to us via Facebook or the Inspire FM app. So plenty of ways of tuning in and listening to today's discussion, to today's discourse and debate. And most importantly, as always, do try to join in our conversation this evening. 01582 is the number, 01582 481822. I want to speak to some of my good listeners this evening. 01582 481822. Many stories we're going to be discussing this evening, so there's plenty of topics for you to choose, have an opinion on, and get your thoughts across to me here live in the Inspire FM studio, and then of course live to nationally international audiences. 07779 481 is the number for SMS and WhatsApp messages. Right, of course, Jummah Mubarak to everyone. I mean, very interesting Jummah khutbah today in the Islamic Center on the coronavirus. So some advice that was being given on the coronavirus from an Islamic perspective. I thought it was a very interesting topic in terms of the khutbah, and alhamdulillah, we've got the khatib who gave that khutbah, who's also going to be giving us an update on, not an update, but an Islamic perspective, how to view, the coronavirus from an Islamic perspective. So we've managed to get in touch with the khatib, and the khatib's going to be available for us later on this show, and we're going to be getting some advice from the khatib, inshallah ta'ala. But before then, we've got a number of other stories we're going to be covering with yourselves, so do try to get involved. We're going to be discussing the US and Taliban deal that was signed earlier this week, right? That was after 18 or 19 years of war with Afghanistan. The US war against Afghanistan, or the Taliban, 19 years. Wow, right? So what prompted the US to come to the negotiation table with the Taliban and sign their deal? We're going to be looking behind the scene and trying to understand who are the winners and who are the losers, and what is really driving the peace deal between US and Taliban. So that's going to be our lead story. We're also going to be getting an update from Syria and Turkey on the clashes, the border clashes, and what's happening in Idlib, right? So a lot going on there. We're going to get an update from a political perspective and also from a humanitarian perspective. That's your first hour this evening. Second hour of the show, inshallah ta'ala, like I said to you, I've got the khatib for you who gave the khutbah on Islam and the coronavirus. How do we look at the virus, the epidemics, or the such illnesses or such diseases from an Islamic perspective? We've got some good news coming from Olive Tree Primary School in Luton, so we're going to be sharing that with you and speaking to the head of Olive Tree Primary School. And then we're also going to be looking at a local initiative, a very creative initiative that is being put together to address knife crime. So that's the lineup this evening, folks. Right, inshallah, we're gonna be moving on to our lead story. But before we move on to the news story, in fact, we've got someone on the call to address today's disruption in Bury Park. So this is a very Luton-centric conversation and a story. Anyone who's been around in Luton today would have really realized the disruption that has been caused today in Bury Park. This is Luton, and this is almost the heart of Luton, or at least the Asian area, where there's a lot of a huge shopping parade, huge shopping market, and a lot of shops around. The whole area was sealed off earlier on this morning. In fact, I drove through Bury Park very early hours of the morning and saw the police cars in action. We've got Shazia Mahmood on the call, who's from Nirala Bury Park, to give us an update. Shazia, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Jazakallah for joining us on Friday Night Live. So has your business been impacted by what's been happening in Bury Park today, Shazia?
It has been. It's Friday. Fridays were always really, really busy, and it was certainly very much quieter than it normally is today.
Right. So tell us, what were you kept well informed in terms of what's been happening, or what's the background to it? Was there a clear line of communication from the police in terms of advising the businesses what's happening?
Not at our side of the street. We basically heard from the rumour mill. We had customers who were coming in and telling us what they thought was happening. Right. But we didn't really know what was happening at all. I only found out because I usually go into the shop early and nothing had happened when I went in. And it was only when I was about to open that I realised that the whole street was blocked up.
Okay.
So I didn't really know at all what was happening.
Right.
So people started coming in and telling us.
All right. Okay, subhanAllah. So it's a lot of disruption, but of course I'm just reading the press statement on the Bedfordshire Police website. The roads now in Luton, I believe, have now reopened.
It's been open.
Yeah, so alhamdulillah. So it's time to catch up on business. Maybe stay open a few hours later on this evening to catch up on all of that lost trade, sister.
To be honest, I mean, I don't know what other people think about this, but I feel that what the police did was right.
Yeah.
It was a suspicious device in a vehicle.
Yeah.
They weren't sure what it was. And I think anybody would say unequivocally that it would be better to be safe rather than sorry. We don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what it was. And rather than have a situation where people are hurt or injured, it's better just to keep everybody safe. And I think they followed procedure, did everything they were supposed to do. And at the end of the day, everybody's fine. And whatever it turned out to be, we don't really know yet. But at least we know that nobody was hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Jazakallah khair, Sister Shazia, for the update. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so we've got to move on to the next story. But Jazakallah khair, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jazakallah khair. Okay, that was Sister Shazia Mahmood from Nirala Bury Park update. If you've been impacted by the road closures earlier on this morning, or in fact the whole of the day in Bury Park, either as one of the local businesses or as just a citizen, someone who lives in the community, and you want to share your thoughts, 01582 4818 220 779 4818 I totally concur with Sister Shazia's observations and her viewpoint, which is better safe than sorry, and the police had to undertake the due process to ensure the safety of everyone before they actually reopen that. And unfortunately it has taken the whole of the day today before they've been able to open up the roads, but the roads are now open, alhamdulillah. And I can say great, it's good news, the fact that whatever that suspicious package or item was, is now being declared safe, and it's business as usual. Right, so I believe we're going to move on to our lead story, and that is the US and Taliban deal, peace deal that was signed after or almost ending an 18-19-year war in Afghanistan, right? So this was very interesting news earlier this week when, of course, this ceremony was held in Qatar, and of course there was a number of dignitaries that were invited, or a number of individuals that were invited into this ceremony from Russia, China, Qatar, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, all gathered together on February the 29th to sign this particular deal. The deal was signed by US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad and Taliban political chief Mullah Abdullah Ghani Baradar, with Pompeo as a witness, right? Number of things that the deal seeks to achieve. I think we're trying to line up our guests who are going to be the more experts that are going to be providing some analysis on this particular subject. But first, after the first 135 days of the deal, the US will reduce its troops. There will also be apparently a full withdrawal of all US and coalition forces would occur within 14 months, and there's going to be an exchange of prisoners and so on and so forth, right? So a number of things there. that are being promised, that are being pledged. Let's see whether this turns into reality or not, because already analysts and commentators are saying the US Taliban peace deal is a road to nowhere, right? And in fact, the Afghan conflict, US conducts first airstrike on Taliban since the deal has been signed. So doesn't it look like things are going in the right direction? Let's get the view from America first. Here we got Muhammad Atif on the call. Muhammad Atif, of course, is from the Voice of America. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Muhammad Atif, and Jazakallah for joining us on Friday Night Live.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Great. Muhammad Atif, a lot of people will be asking this question. I mean, is this, after 18 or 19 years of war between America, which is arguably in the world today, one of the world's strongest, country in the world, that's been fighting a war against the world's almost weakest country in the world. And it's taken them 19 years to come to, to come to a conclusion of this war. Many commentators are interpreting this as a loss for America after 19 years. Well, what's your view and what's the American view on this deal being signed?
The views are mixed. First off, Americans are also tired of this war.
Yeah.
And there were no results. After 19 years, there is no result. Afghanistan is still fighting a civil war sort of thing. Yes, we can say that on the end of terrorism, America fought off Al-Qaeda successfully. America also fought off ISIS successfully, but they could not figure out how to deal with Taliban. And Taliban, mind you, are Afghans. They claim that it was their government, it is their country, and they're fighting a foreign enemy in Afghanistan. So when it comes to that, the Afghans are also divided. Half of the country is being ruled by the government of President Ashraf Ghani, that is obviously supported by NATO partners, America, and the Western world.
Yeah.
Half of the Afghanistan was under control of the Taliban. So there, you can see that, there is no solution. So, either America goes and bomb all the Talibans, that's not going to happen. That should never, ever, ever happen.
All right.
So on your question that, maybe it's not a win and it's a defeat for America, people have raised this question as well, and this concern as well, that the world's strongest military could not defeat guerrilla fighters.
Right.
And that's the issue.
Right.
Guerrilla fighters. They were not an army. They were not. Yes.
Mohammed, I've got Abu Isra on the call also. Abu Isra is a political commentator and specializes in the kind of Afghan-Pakistan politics. Abu Isra, we're discussing with Muhammad Atif from the United States. It's taken 19 years for the US in Afghanistan, the world's strongest nation versus arguably the world's weakest nation. Is this an acknowledgement of the US defeat in Afghanistan, or was the initial military objectives achieved a long time ago?
Well, the way I see it, Americans had certain objectives before they launched this war in October 2001. The question is whether they achieved their objectives or not after 19 years and spending $1 trillion+ and getting 4,000 plus of their own soldiers killed and many more thousands injured. So what were the objectives? I think we need to understand, and then against that we can then judge whether they won or lost. I mean, there were a number of things. One, of course, was a presence in this region, a permanent sort of basis, thereby controlling the region. So they had, for example, an emerging China on one side, and Central Asia was quite highly destabilized with the rise of ideological Islam in places like Uzbekistan and in this region. So there was a real threat that this region could basically become an area where an alternative to the Soviet sort of a Soviet state-like power emerging, a Muslim power emerging, a Muslim state emerging. So they had a number of objectives. Right. After 19 years, it is blatantly obvious to any geopolitical analyst that America has been defeated. But what they militarily they have been defeated. But what they want to achieve now is to bring Taliban onto a negotiation table and thereby engaging them into a localized politics, eventually, which will be controlled by the Americans remotely. And so, hence, I think they have managed to secure something from. They've managed to salvage something from this defeat, to be honest. But that was a few days ago. I mean, obviously, since then we know that this peace deal has not lasted that much.
Absolutely. I mean, Mohammed, Atif, in terms of the timing, of course, I mean, is quite key, isn't it? I mean, America's got elections around the corner, and many analysts again are pointing their finger towards, Trump being in a hurry to sign this deal and be able to showcase it precisely for his inner, political gains, as opposed to Taliban, have now come around this idea of peace, or somehow all the pieces are falling into place, and this is the ideal time, for signing a peace deal. It looks like more political gains and points to be scored for Trump administration than actually there is on the ground in terms of real legitimate peace.
The efforts for peace in Afghanistan are not recent. If I may remind everybody that when the trilateral dialogue started, there was a meeting that was going to be held in Murree, next to Islamabad. That was 2015, when the news of Mullah Omar's death was made public. So the efforts to bring peace in Afghanistan did not start last year or after President Trump got elected into presidency. These efforts have been going for a very long time, and Taliban have had an office in Qatar for a very long time. But when it comes to American politics, yes, all presidents want something to present to their voter base. President Obama, when he got elected for the first term, he promised that he's going to end the Iraq war. So war is a big thing.
Sure.
The economy has invested, as your guest said, over $3 trillion in Afghanistan. So that's a big thing. Yes. It might help President Trump. But let me complete my thought.
Okay, go on.
Secondly, a lot of anti-American world is seeing this deal as a defeat to America. They can see it as a defeat to America. There's still a sentiment that, America is going to do something to remain their bases there or their military there. No, that's not going to happen. If you read the agreement, there's timeline, there are deadlines. If everything goes well, everything's going to happen. Now, it comes to President Ghani and Taliban.
Just hang on there, Mohammed Atif, if I may. You just hang on there, because we don't have much time. I want to go into a couple of other points. The point here is, Abu Isra, right? A lot of money has been invested by America, trillions we're talking about. In 19 years, America has persisted in Afghanistan without any clear, result and an outcome, right? And it's suffered on a number of different, areas. So there is definitely a bigger geopolitical, what is it, prize here for America at stake that, that's been prepared to go all the way. So it's not going to simply just pull out its troops and just pack its bags and leave that region, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, there will be disasters on U.S. part. I mean, so hence what they're trying to do now is to salvage for this situation. And I with all due respect, I don't agree with my collocator on the point that Americans troops will withdraw eventually. Although it's been mentioned in the agreement, but we know what happened to this agreement already now. It didn't even last a week, this peace deal, the so-called peace deal. So the idea was that they will station there around 8,600 troops in Kabul, whether in the under the guise of military personnel or contractors, but Americans will definitely 100% would like to keep their forces in Kabul. They will continuously try to direct the affairs in Kabul through the people they've installed over the years. I mean, starting from Hamid Karzai to the present leader Ashraf Ghani, who was basically parachuted from the United States, a professor in U.S. University. So basically, they will not give up that easily. I mean, they have invested heavily in this, and their plan is to keep some sort of presence in Kabul.
Mohammed Atif, I know you don't have much time, so last quick question for you. Which is the US troops, I mean globally, or you pick a region in the world where, and the US troops and bases are there. So the US, I mean, even though it's actually trying to sell this, to its internal public, domestic consumption, that the US troops are finally coming home, time to bring back our people home, the reality is that there will be, and I've got statistics here, at least 5,000 US troops will leave Afghanistan, but a number of US troops will remain in Afghanistan, and of course that's the geopolitical interest of America globally to retain its key positions and military around the world.
Well, the US bases around the world, they're not fighting wars. In Afghanistan, the US military is fighting a war. So it's different than having a base and then having your troops fighting a war. So let's just be clear on that. Secondly, the agreement says by 2021, May 2021, all of the U.S. troops would be out. If that condition is not met, if that condition was not there, there would be no peace agreement between Taliban and the U.S. forces in the first place. So you have to understand, what's going to happen tomorrow? I don't know. What's going to happen a month later? I don't know. But if we look at the agreement, yes, as your other guest has said, that the peace deal is already gone, with Taliban fighting the Afghan troops and U.S. troops retaliating and fighting and attacking the Taliban. Yes, but after that, Mullah Baradar had a phone call with President Trump. After that, Zalmay Khalilzad met Mullah Baradar. So it's not that here we signed the agreement. Now we're attacking each other and no more communication. No, there is communication. There would be some result.
Okay, all right. Abu Isra, let's talk about the geopolitics, right? Let's talk about Pakistan, because Pakistan's been quite instrumental in the backdoor diplomacy, in getting Taliban onto the table, forcing some of these conversations and these dialogues to take place and negotiations. What's driving? What's the compelling factor to get Taliban onto the table, a negotiation table? What's the interest of Pakistan in all of this? And of course, India is not happy with a stable Afghanistan at all. Anyway, so explain to our listeners what's the bigger picture here. What's the gain? Who are the main gainers and who are the ones who are likely to lose here?
Well, I mean. If I have to be a little bit blunt here, I mean, Pakistan, as we know, for the last almost 6+ decades, have been quite orbiting quite close to U.S. sphere of influence. So ultimately, why Pakistan played this particular role in getting Taliban to have dialogue and then this peace deal with the U.S. It is that sort of client-state type relationship that Pakistan has with the Americans, and they were used as a facilitators in this process. So what are the implications for Pakistan? I mean, maybe some further aid from Americans in response to offering the services that Pakistan has offered. Don't forget that Pakistan has offered all kind of services to the U.S. in the last 19 years, from the NATO supply line that goes through Pakistan, from providing our air bases in Jakarabad and Shamsi, where the drones were flying from Pakistani air bases and they were attacking within Pakistan, and so all sorts of services have been rendered to the United States.
So that's Pakistan. I get that, right? So Pakistan's obviously doing it for two almost reasons. One is obviously the political economic interest from the states, and then also having a stable Afghanistan is in the interest of, I guess, Pakistan, right, as opposed to India, because a lot of commentators are writing, of course, that India is not too happy with a more of a stable Afghanistan. It's in its interest to have a destabilized Afghanistan, right? What about internally when Afghanistan, or this struggle between the Taliban and of course the pro-US government that's been put in there by the US? What's the dynamics there?
Well, I mean, the Taliban were quite clear in their stance for many, many years. They never recognized any installed government in Kabul, from Hamid Karzai times to Ashraf Ghani's time, and all these Abdullahs and the rest of the teams, Taliban never recognized them. They were. It was fairly obvious to Taliban and the rest of the region that these were governments installed by the occupying force. So,
what is this then? That now Taliban are coming to the negotiating table, signing on in this deal? Isn't that then just a capitulation after 18, 19 years of a struggle? Is that how you're reading it?
Well, this is exactly how I am reading it, because it just beggars belief that once you have almost you were almost there as Taliban, almost destroying. Not destroying literally, but I mean, defeating a superpower. I mean, and when you had the opportunity to basically not, take on their demands, when you had a full upper hand. Yeah. I mean, it beggars belief that you have gone into these type of peace deals and all that when you have almost have a victory in your sight now, a complete victory.
Okay. Yeah. Abu Isra, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I would love to continue conversation, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us this evening and shedding some light on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Okay, listeners, that was Abu Isra, and earlier we had Muhammad Atif. Unfortunately, we lost Muhammad Atif, Voice of America, but thank you very much for your time this evening, Muhammad Atif Saab. And we were discussing the US and Taliban deal that was signed earlier after 18 or 19 years of war in Afghanistan. I want to get your thoughts on this particular story. 01582 4818 220 779 481822. We're going to go into a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to be discussing Syria and Turkey. Don't go away. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Atif Nawaz. Listen to Inspire FM shows in your time by heading over to inspirefm.org or listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Friday Night Live with me, Hafiz Sha'ban, on this Friday, the 6th of March early evening. It is now just gone past 6:30 p.m. And we have just finished the first half an hour of the show. Just been discussing, getting an update on the US and Taliban peace deal that was signed earlier in the week, apparently ending a 19-year war in Afghanistan. Now, I tell you what is really, really incredible. Subhanallah, I remember this back in 2001 when it all started. It was actually coined as the world's, strongest, mightiest, country in the world, power in the world, fighting the world's weakest. And 19 years on, we're still discussing it. Isn't that incredible? What's been going on there, right? So we've been discussing with a few political commentators and analysts and trying to get their view in terms of what's prompted America to come onto the negotiating table. Of course, they've been discussing for many, many years, but recently they've obviously signed this historic deal and they have made a lot of press about it. So that's what we were discussing first half an hour. Earlier also we had Sister Shazia who gave us an update in terms of the situation in Bury Park here in Luton and the closure of Bury Park earlier this morning, the whole day today, and what was happening, what was the reason behind that. Alright, we're going to move on to our next story. Next story also involves international politics, involves international, maneuverings and political, actions between Muslim nations. It's unfortunate we're finding Muslim nations, at odds with one another. Not surprising, you may say, but in this particular case, right, we want to discuss Turkey and the Syrian clashes, right, that have been going on for a while, for a number of years. We know on the border, of course, Turkey and Syria share a very long border, and the clashes, of course, have been going on for some time. Recently, a lot of fatalities have been incurred on both sides, rather, should I say. And of course, at the center point of a lot of these clashes is Idlib and the region, which is obviously still one of those regions that is not in the hands of the Assad government forces, but of course in the hand of the anti-Assad forces. So a lot going on there, and a lot of casualties on both sides of things, right? And of course, just recently, another ceasefire in Idlib has been declared between Russia and Turkey, and this is one of those ceasefires that has been announced previously on many occasions. So I want to try to get some context to all of this going on and understand what's happening. Well, let's speak to some experts and to try to shed some light in terms of what's happening in the region. What is the latest status from Idlib and the border regions? We've got Dr. Afzal Ashraf, who's the Assistant Professor of International Relations and Security at the University of Nottingham, here locally. And we've got Hassan Abdullah, who's the Diplomatic Correspondent at TRT World. I want to welcome both gentlemen to Friday Night Live on Inspire FM this evening. Thank you very much for joining us this evening on the show. I want to go straight to you, Hassan Abdullah, firstly. Based out in Turkey, I understand. What is the latest status, Hassan Abdullah, on these, cross-border conflicts between Turkey and Syria, and what's at stake?
Well, after the ceasefire kicked in at midnight local time in Syria, there were initially a couple of violations by the Assad regime, it seems, in which they did make some advances towards the areas that had been declared under the Sochi agreement. They were not supposed to go past those areas. But after that, things did sort of die down a bit. At this point in time, it's rather quiet. Of course, if you were to compare it to the last few days, we haven't been witnessing the sort of aerial campaigns that we've been seeing from the Assad regime as well as from the Russians. Right.
So Hassan, tell me, what's the bigger picture here, right? So we've around 60 Turkish soldiers have been killed earlier. I don't know what the late, in terms of the government offensive on Idlib, right? And then, a number of Syrian troops have been killed. This is cross-fighting between Turkey and Syria. Is the main prize here that's been fought over Idlib or over and beyond that?
Well, let's remember that Idlib is the last remaining stronghold of the opposition forces.
Yeah.
The previous de-escalation zones that had been agreed upon, they were violated. There were mass migrations, not just of the ordinary people, but also the opposition fighters. They had moved out from various areas. So, of course, at this point in time, it's a case of survival as far as the opposition groups are concerned. Now, after Turkey launched a military operation in Idlib, that did provide some breathing space to the opposition groups, and they did sort of try to consolidate some of the territory they had lost. But as a result of the ceasefire, it seems what's going to happen is that the Assad regime is going to perhaps regroup. Also, the sectarian militia groups supporting the Assad regime, they will probably regroup. And many of the opposition groups aren't actually very happy about this ceasefire because they feel that they're going to lose the momentum that had been building up. Remember, they had been moving towards areas like Saraqib, about 15 kilometers to the east of Idlib city. So some of the opposition groups aren't exactly very happy about this.
Right. All right. Let me bring in Dr. Afzal Ashraf, joining us from the University of Nottingham, of course, International Relations, Assistant Professor in International Relations. Dr. Afzal, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I don't know to what extent you've been following this region and the events between Turkey and Syria. What's the bigger, the bigger prize here at stake? I mean, of course, Turkey is but physically in Syria here when we're talking about Idlib and the Idlib province. What's Turkey's ambitions here? Is it to, control, kind of border this, police this border region? Is it to neutralize it against, the Kurdish, kind of rebels in that area? Is it to actually expand its own nation state and annex the northern part of Syria? What's the bigger game here from a Turkish perspective?
The bigger game here is the difference between stability and instability in the region, and the difference between short-term gains and long-term gains. What we've got here is Turkey that has seen an opportunity when the United States, which was backing Kurdish forces as an opposition to the Assad regime, because the aim has always been to have regime change. When the U.S. gave up on that idea, the Kurdish forces represented a potential threat to Turkey, and Turkey wanted to ensure that this region, which was bordering its territory, didn't fall into the hands of the Kurdish opposition. Now, the problem there is that what the Turkish military or the Turkish government is doing is exactly what the Americans have done and what others are doing, and that is to use irregular forces to augment its own military. So they're using what they call opposition forces, but some of these are terrorist groups, they're extremist groups operating under different names. There are up to 200 that I once counted. And so what we've got is a basically controlled anarchy. And this particular crisis has arisen because there has been a breakdown of communication between the Turkish military and the Russians, who are controlling the airspace and much of the ground fighting. And I think that one of the lessons that the Turks have learned from this is that they need to coordinate their activities better with the Russians, but also what they, I think, ought to learn, and there's no evidence here, that they have to come to terms with the fact that they cannot have a military solution, particularly a solution using irregular forces, that they do need a political solution, and quite frankly, the only really durable and sustainable solution in the long term is to do what the UN said in one of its recent resolutions, and that is to restore the sovereignty of the Syrian state over its own territory.
Right.
And I think that until they come to that conclusion, we are going to see this crisis leading to another crisis, and we'll just see a change in crises rather than a solution.
So we'll go to Hassan Abdullah in a short while to get the Turkish perspective. But Dr. Afzal Ashraf, if I may, let's delve a little into the Kurds and what's driving the Kurds, because from the map that I've got in front of me, the geopolitical map, okay, they've got this, the Jarablus and the kind of the northeastern region of Syria is where they prominently, seem to be to have a stronghold, and then you've got, in terms of Idlib, you've got of course the numerous forces, and then you've got the Turkish-backed Syrian, and the Turkish military in the far north, the Afrin kind of region in the area. So who's supporting the Kurds, or in terms of geopolitically and militarily in the region? Is it America, or is it a combination of America plus Iran stroke Syria against Turkey here?
Okay, so the first thing to remember is that the Kurdish people are a very large and diverse population, and what we're talking about is not the Kurdish people or even a particular Kurdish or a group of Kurdish factions. What we're talking about here is a group called the YPG, which is part of an organization called PKK, and the PKK has been a designated terrorist organization according to the US and the UK. The ideology of this organization is primarily a sort of socialist ideology, and for that reason, it appeals, strangely enough, to the Russians because of their sort of socialist background. But up to recently, the YPG has been supported and been used as an instrument of military and political operations by the USA and its coalition. And what happened is that whilst they did achieve a great deal of success on the ground, they weren't able to push forward and achieve the objective, which was regime change. And Mr. Trump decided enough was enough and that he was going to withdraw. So what that did was leave the Kurds without a backer. And what is difficult for me to determine, maybe your other guests might be able to throw some light on it. There were moves for the Kurds to try and do an alliance with President Assad's regime because they feared the Turks more than they feared the regime. Now, I don't know what became of that because news isn't very clear out of that region. Anyway, they are left dangling, so to speak. They are not with any official backer, and it is to keep them away from the borders of Turkey that the Turks are primarily conducting the operations near Idlib.
Right, all right, I'd really appreciate that. And Hassan Abdullah, if I may come to you, Okay, it's interesting what Dr. Afzal Ashraf has just said with regards to really trying to achieve long-term gains and stability in the region, and it's a very interesting point actually, because Turkey's been fighting a so-called guerrilla war or a civil war or an outright war against the Kurdish rebellion, this YPG or the PKK or whatever the permeation is taken, or the form that is taken, for a long time. Is it time for Turkey to actually reconsider how does it act as a melting pot for different people of different ethnicities? I mean, it's interesting because 1924 Turkish, it was in this month of Rajab that the Ottoman Empire was actually officially abolished, and under the Ottoman Empire all of these different ethnicities acted as a melting pot and lived together quite harmoniously. It's interesting that how in the current secular framework it's unable to address and actually absorb its different ethnicities and people of different backgrounds.
Well, you're right about the point as far as the Ottoman Empire is concerned. During that time, you can argue that the level of tolerance pertaining to different ethnicities was very high, and not just Muslim groups, but even non-Muslim groups. Many Jews were living under the Ottoman Empire without really having any substantial problems and so forth. So that point is correct. After the secularization of Turkey, the forced secularization, what we did witness was the rise of certain secular ideologies that, quite frankly, had a rather racist and discriminatory attitude towards the Kurdish groups. But if you're speaking in relative terms, after the ruling AK Party came into power, there were a number of changes that were introduced. For example, let's not forget that there were restrictions on even the Kurdish language, use of the Kurdish language or teaching the Kurdish language, various other restrictions. So you've got basically a whole generation of Kurds in Turkey who cannot even speak Kurdish. So those things have changed, but it wasn't any sort of Islamic-driven changes as such.
Sure.
They were done under the banner of liberalism. In terms of rights, the sort of liberalization in Turkey that we witnessed post-2002.
Right, I get that, Hassan. But what is the bigger?
I think it's important to set the record.
Okay, go on. It's fine.
So there's a lot of relativism that would come in here. So that's the point. So at this point in time, it's a very detailed topic, but you've got different political groups in Turkey. You've got different political ideologies. So, if you were to compare, let's say, the AKP to a party like the E Party or the MHP, their approach towards the Kurds and what's sometimes referred to as the Kurdish problem is quite different. Right. So, it's probably unfair to just paint everything with the same brush.
Fine. But the question fundamentally, Brother Hassan, is how does Turkey, I'm sure, just like many other nations around the world, wants peace, wants a stability, right, and it wants to hopefully absorb and integrate the different different ethnicities and people from different backgrounds and whatever they're from. The point here is it going to achieve that peace militarily and the way it is going about its business at the moment, or is it going to be by understanding these? I understand the complexities, but understanding these these different peoples, understanding what their maybe I don't know what their political ambitions are, and trying to come to some kind of a middle ground and some kind of an agreement, something similar to the levels that you had during the Ottoman Empire, kind of. That's the way I'm looking at it. Maybe too idealistic, but you tell me.
Well, first of all, it's going to be a combination of hard power and soft power when it comes to any problems. In the past, let's not forget that if you're talking about in the context of the PKK, there have been talks between the two. There have been, between the Turkish establishment and the PKK, there have been agreements. There has been ceasefire in the past. So there's a long history of how things have unfolded. Now, the problem of comparing it with the Ottoman times is, fundamentally the structure has changed. Right. The very thought process has changed. Yeah. Comparing a system that you can say was inspired by Islamic thought to an extent, comparing it to the present Westphalian system, I think it's very unfair because you probably have to do like a series of programs on this. If you want to really go deep into it, the Islamic ideology is very different from the secular
right. I get you.
Nationalist ideology.
I get you.
So obviously, For example, if you're talking about an Islamic structure, you're not going to have under a proper Islamic system problems of racism or problems of such nationalistic sort of issues. You're not going to have that. So I think it's probably unfair to compare apples and oranges.
I get that point, right? Which then leads me nicely onto my next question. And let me go back to Dr. Afzal then, because based upon what you're telling me, if it is the norm now, the nation states, the ethnicities, the national, and these national and patriotic kind of, political ambitions of all of these different ethnicities to have their own so-called self-autonomous kind of regions, then what America in essence has done is pulled itself out and left political anarchy there amongst these different factions and let them just fight it out. And you know what? They're going to be continuing fighting on for decades, just like we see in a lot of other regions around the world where Britain did exactly the same. It's just exactly the same what America's just done there between Turkey and Syria, and we're going to just see this going on for a number of years to come. Dr. Afzal, do you kind of follow that script or subscribe to that view, or do you think else? Do you think otherwise?
Well, I think that to help answer your question, we need to just go back. You've had a discussion, very interesting one, about the Ottoman period. But in my opinion, the organizations that we're talking about, the PKK, etc., were greatly helped during the Cold War. What the Russians did with the Kurds in Turkey and indeed in Iraq, where you had the PUK and the KDP, was to do what the Americans were also doing, was to empower those groups that were ethnically diverse to cause a problem for the host nations. And Turkey, of course, was in the front line. It's one of the few countries that is a member of NATO and is borders with Russia directly. And so what we have are these organizations, most of which had a socialist ideology, which empowered. And of course, that backing has long gone, but they have now got a momentum on their own. They have a culture, a political culture and a military culture which is revolutionary, which is about using subversive power to gain their independence. Now, the fact is you have a nation where the Kurds describe themselves as a nation, the largest nation without a state, and that nation is spread over several countries, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And so there is a need for a long-term solution which may come about as the KRG, the Kurdish regional government in Iraq, seems to be bringing about a model of sort of semi-autonomous nature where it can be part of a state but have a degree of semi-autonomy as a nation. So there are political models out there. What there needs to be is an understanding from all concerned that the modus operandi that has been adopted by the US and other great nations is no longer valid. I mean, forget the ethical argument. It is way past its sell-by date. No regime change, operational war has been successful. No use of proxy warfare using these irregular groups has been successful. In the last over quarter of a century, a third of a century, all of the wars that these big states have been playing have failed. So it's time for everybody, including the regional countries and the states or nations like the Kurds, to understand that they have political problems, and these problems can be more successfully achieved through negotiation and political processes. Using violence only weakens everybody in the region. It hasn't achieved any success apart from individuals who benefit from the corruption and other things that a violent breakdown in society brings. The vast majority of people suffering has continued and is accelerated. So the solution lies in recognizing that we need a change of global political systems, and that change doesn't need to be led by a global power. It can be led by small nations and by small groups, and just think about their long-term benefits and their long-term security and their long-term prosperity. Right. In the case of Turkey, lies with peace and prosperity of its people, including the Kurds, and of its neighbors, including Syria.
Right, Dr. Afzal Ashraf, I was going to ask you for a concluding statement, but I think you've already made it. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, Assistant Professor at the University of Nottingham of International Relations. Thank you very much, Dr. Afzal Ashraf, for really adding that expertise, insight into that issue. Hassan Abdullah, just I'm going to come to you for your concluding remarks, and we've got about 2 minutes remaining. I mean, Syria is what is it, 9 years now into the conflict. Of course, there's been a number of casualties recently on both sides in terms of Turkey and Syria. I mean, what is the appetite? I mean, I guess it's an obvious question that, of course, there's going to be a lot of patriotism and a lot of nationalism and a lot of national, political point scoring at stake to actually, stand the ground and continue and show a hard front in terms of defending its borders. But is it really achieving success, and is that the long-term strategic direction that Turkey wants to take when it comes to its relationship with Syria? What do you think? What is the political appetite on the ground, and how do we resolve this current kind of crisis that we've got between Syria and Turkey, Hassan, in 1 minute, if you may?
Well, you raised some very good questions there. I think, first of all, there needs to be clarity about what the long-term objectives are, because unfortunately what happens in this in democratic system, I think this is one of the downsides of democracy, is that it turns the leaders very short-sighted. Sometimes, it's about electoral gains, and they're not sort of looking at the very long-term objectives. So that's a fundamental structural problem in my view. Regarding Syria, of course, Turkey says that pragmatically speaking, it's about its security concerns. The YPG creating a canton in the north of Syria and using it as a launch pad to provide support to the PKK in Turkey. So, Turkey says it's about ensuring its security. But again...
Hassan, you've got 30 seconds.
Right, you have to clearly define the long-term objectives and then go from there. Then you have to strategize accordingly. At the moment, as I said, there's a structural problem with democracy.
And do you think that the appetite in Turkey is to continue, just stay firm in its current course, or do you think there's going to be a change of tactic and a change of strategy? Very quickly.
I think they will continue on this current course at the moment. But very briefly, I think the Muslim world is suffering from cognitive dissonance.
All right. Okay. Dr. Afzal Ashraf and Hassan Abdullah, it was actually a pleasure talking to you. Great expertise, insight into the issue. And I would love to talk to you, but unfortunately, you've got to go into a commercial break and continue with the next stories. Thank you very much, gents, for joining us this evening. Okay, that was Dr. Afzal Ashraf, and that was Hassan Abdullah from TIT World and University of Nottingham. We were discussing the Syria-Turkish political dynamics. We're going to go into a commercial break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes when we will continue with the show. Don't go away, and do join me in a couple of minutes. Until then, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Atif Nawaz, and you're listening to an Inspire FM podcast.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Friday Night Live, and subhanallah, 1 hour of the show has already gone by. There is an internal debate. Let me share an internal debate with you. Some people say that Friday Night Live should be 1 hour show, and as opposed to the 2 hour regular slot that we have. And subhanallah, the first hour of the show has already gone by, and I haven't even noticed it, right? So, more for the argument that we need 2 hour solid discussion and conversations, and we need to be sharing this with our listeners. So we need our listeners to also get involved, to also share their thoughts on the stories that we're covering. I want to say Jazakallah khair for Hamza Atiq, who has actually messaged in with regards to my comment earlier, and that was with regards to the US versus the Taliban, and it was coined as the world's strongest nation versus the world's weakest nation, and of course that is not necessarily true at all. So he says in his WhatsApp message, world's strongest ? I don't know about that, and indeed that's exactly what's been demonstrated. It's not about what your military might is it? It's not about military might always. It's about a lot of other factors: ideological might, psychological might. And we've seen here that after 18, 19 years, America is decided, and in fact, long time ago, America was ready to pull the plug and get out of there, but it needs to have some kind of face. It needs to hold some kind of face, save some kind of face before it can pull out. And that's exactly what it's done, Hamza. So let me know what your thoughts are. I don't literally mean that it is the world's strongest, but that is what the world considers it to be. Right, and then subhanallah, we were discussing Turkey-Syria clashes and getting a fantastic political analysis by Dr. Afzal Ashraf, who's an assistant professor of international relations at the University of Nottingham, and Hassan Abdullah, who's a diplomatic correspondent at TRT World out in Turkey. Great insight by the two gentlemen, very, very professional, fantastic insight. And you know what, I really liked Hassan Abdullah's comment. I liked his view on the Ottoman Empire. You might not find it surprising, but I tell you another very interesting comment Hassan Abdullah makes, right? And I want to get your view on this particular issue, right? But on this particular comment, he said the fundamental problem, or one of the problems, or one of the flaws with democracy is it's all about short-term gain. It's all about short-term gain, and a lot of these leaders come in and they are exactly looking at what is the short-term gain that we can get as a political party in our 4 years to ensure that we're then voted in again. So they're not looking at the long-term strategic goal of a nation. They're looking at a short-term gain and their own political gain, and of course that political gain is often sponsored by the capitalists who invest all of the money. What do you think? Democracy fundamentally flawed? Do you agree with Hassan Abdullah's comments, or disagree with it? 01582 481 Who's gonna call in and speak to me live here on Friday Night Live? Or you can send me your SMS or your WhatsApp message. Do you agree or disagree? 07779 481 822. Right, time to move on to what is the lineup for the next hour. The lineup for the next hour, very quickly, we're going to be discussing with a very interesting initiative that's happening in Luton. Some local news we're going to be covering for the next half an hour. So Luton groups come together to make anti-knife crime art displays. So that's an interesting story. We thought we'll cover that. So we're going to be covering that for about 5 to 10 minutes, inshallah. And then we've got some very positive news, very positive announcements that's come out from Olive Tree Primary School. So I was speaking with the head teacher from Olive Tree Primary School, I believe yesterday, and there's some fantastic news that they want to announce, and they have announced it, and that is once again opening up for new students and new student enrolment. So we're going to be discussing what's been happening at the Olive Tree over the last couple of years. So let's get their journey from the head teacher directly, who inshallah should be on his way into the studio. And then in the last half an hour, we're going to be getting an Islamic perspective on the coronavirus, right? The coronavirus, which is now, I was just looking at the BBC headlines. BBC headline reads, the coronavirus infections nearly 100,000 globally, right? Whilst a lot of us are following it medically in terms of what's happening, what we can do to prevent, to protect ourselves, have you actually considered Islamic view and the Islamic perspective on epidemics, on the plague, or whether it's the coronavirus or such, kind of global, international kind of viruses and epidemics? What does Islam have to say about it all, right? So we're going to be speaking to, inshallah ta'ala, Ustad Aqil Mahmood, who's the Imam and Khatib of Green Lane Masjid, and he was in Luton today. He was in Luton today, and he gave the khutbah in Islamic Center on this particular subject matter, and I found it very, very interesting. I was there. I found it very interesting, and I thought, let's get this Imam to give us an Islamic view on this particular subject matter. All right, so that's the lineup for the next hour. If you want to get in touch, 01582 481 822 0779 481 822. But before we discuss those, let's move on to Luton groups coming together to make anti-knife crime art display. Very, very interesting. Sounds very interesting, right? And indeed, this is the organizations have created an art exhibition, right, about gangs and about knife crime. So a number of different organizations have come together and they're putting together this exhibition. It's going to open on Saturday, Saturday 14th of March at the University of Bedfordshire from 12 till 3. And it's going to be an exhibition about, like I said, knife crime and gangs, right? It's going to be highlighting both the problems and the solutions when people become involved in gangs and knife crime. Why don't we speak to someone who's actually involved in the organization of this initiative, and let's find out more about it. I think I've got Mia on the phone. Mia, are you on the phone?
Yeah, hello.
Okay, now it says Mia. I don't know if that's your full name, if that's what you want me to refer to you as. Is that okay?
Yeah, that'll do. Don't worry
fantastic.
about it.
Okay, Mia. All right. Firstly, so welcome to Friday Night Live. Welcome to Inspire FM. I've just given a quick introduction in terms of the local initiative, which is it's about some of these groups coming together to make an anti-knife crime kind of art display. Is that about right?
Yeah, essentially. So the project, we decided at the very beginning that we wanted it to be art-based.
Right.
So like our general kind of things that we tend to tackle are issues like gang crime, like knife crime, stuff like that, and trying to like keep people, like young people in particular, safe and off the streets.
Yeah.
And the way that we wanted to approach it this time is through art. So we decided that we were going to do an art exhibition and ask a lot of people if they would do some pieces for us to display, and it's in all kind of forms of art. So sort of visual arts and aural, so like sound and performance and stuff like that. So everything is kind of coming together as a way of raising awareness.
Okay, sounds interesting. And this is happening on the 14th of March. Is it Saturday in the University of Bedfordshire?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Where did the idea come from then to put this together?
Well, we are always looking for a way to kind of engage the community because it's what we do as a social enterprise company.
Right.
We're always looking to bring people together.
Right.
And an approach that we hadn't quite taken yet was like through the arts and stuff like that.
Right.
I had recently joined the company just before this event had started.
Right.
So I gave my input on it, as well as other people saying that a good way of expressing these kinds of things is through art, because a lot of people can express emotions and their thoughts and feelings and opinions through so many different forms of art, and it's the most diverse way of doing these things. So from there, we've just kind of developed a lot of ideas and come up with this whole event.
Right, good. Sounds very good. Sounds very interesting. And how's the response to this so far? I mean, are you able to reach the intended target audience? Is the feedback? What's the feedback at the moment that you're getting back?
Well, so far, the feedback that we've been getting is really good, because our target audience is it's very broad, because we want to bring awareness to young people, but then we also want to kind of bring it to people's attention that are older than like the sort of Generation Z, if you will, sort of like looking out for the younger people and kind of doing their part to help as well.
Yeah.
So there's something for everyone in the exhibition, in all different elements of it, all the different things to look at and to engage with.
Right.
There's something for everyone to take from it.
All right. And in terms of the target audience for this, I mean, of course, you're addressing gangs, knife crime. So, I would assume it's the youth, is the younger generation. How have you been able to appeal to that kind of younger target audience to get involved and then to indeed attend this exhibition, which happens, of course, I think, is it next week?
Yeah. So myself, I'm 17, and there's a fair few of us in the company who are around the same age as me, and then a little bit younger, a little bit older.
Okay.
So we, of course, are bringing people along and doing things like that, and then we all have our own sort of individual tasks, which are going to be sort of presented at the exhibition.
Right.
So, for example, I've written a short play, so I've had to cast that and write that, and that's going to be performed.
Okay.
So that's kind of engaging and involving people of the same age range, and I can sort of bring people in from my college as well.
Okay, fine. So it's been advertised in colleges and some of the local institutions, I guess, and that's where you're getting the awareness raised amongst that kind of target audience.
Yeah, definitely. And we do other sort of workshops and exhibitions in the meantime, like up until the event, and then we're mentioning it to people as we go along and sort of trying to keep everyone engaged, even outside of the institution. So people that we don't see in everyday life, just kind of trying to expand the sort of the range of people that are going to be there.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Mia, for joining us this evening on Friday Night Live. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but really appreciate your input into our conversation this evening. Thank you very much, Mia.
Thank you so much.
Wish you best of success. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, listeners, that was Mia, who was speaking to us on behalf of... I don't have the organisation name here, unfortunately. But anyway, she was speaking to us with regards to a number of different groups coming together to make anti-knife crime art display. It's going to be happening. This exhibition is going to be happening. The Stop and Think exhibition is going to be happening next Saturday, 14th of March, at the University of Bedfordshire from 12 till 3 p.m. And it's about, highlighting both the problems and the solutions when people become involved in gangs and knife crime. A very interesting initiative, I think, and the fact that they're using art definitely, I think, will be appealing to a lot of the younger target audience. And if you have got the time, do pop along to this exhibition. I think it'll be well worth it. Right, inshallah, we're going to move on. We're about 13 minutes past the hour, 7 p.m. that is, and we're going to be moving on to another local story, inshallah ta'ala, and that is involving one of our local Islamic schools. Of course, this Islamic school has been in the press for a number of reasons, but recently, mashallah, they've made a very positive announcement to the local community, alhamdulillah, and mashallah, so we've got... the head of the school who's come in, inshallah ta'ala, and is joining me, and he's going to be providing shedding some light on this particular issue. But briefly, inshallah, the school has made an announcement that it is now open to enrolment once again after a recent period where it wasn't able to take on new students. We've got Brother Abdul Wadud, who is the head teacher at Olive Tree Primary School, joining me here in the studio. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Abdul Wadud.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And jazakallah khair for joining me here in the studio, alhamdulillah. So we've got some positive news. We've got a positive announcement that we're making, inshallah ta'ala, that you've made. Do you want to share the announcement with our listeners, with our community?
Yeah, sure. Jazakallah khair first and foremost for having me on the show today. It's been a long journey for us, and I guess a long time coming, but alhamdulillah, after a long 2.5 year struggle, perseverance and dedication, the school is finally now in a position where we can actually enroll new students. Now that sounds a bit strange because that's the norm for most schools, if not all schools.
Yeah.
But in our particular case, it hasn't been the case ever since April 2018. And we've had this challenge on our hands since the summer of 2017. So for us to get to where we are today is a huge milestone and a huge step in the right direction, certainly for where we want to be, inshallah, in the future.
Right, so subhanAllah, so that's great news that you're now able to enroll, right? So very quickly, I don't want to touch too much upon the negatives, but I'm intrigued. What happened? Why were you stopped from being able to enroll students?
So before I answer that question, brother, if I can just add that the team that's currently in place at Olive Tree Primary School has been there since the summer of 2018.
Right.
So what happened prior to us, it would be a little bit unfair for me to comment in detail, not knowing what the challenges and difficulties were. But in essence, to operate and run a school, an independent school, the law has certain standards and rules and regulations that you have to meet.
Okay.
And the way that they measure those regulations is that the DFE commission officer to come out and do inspections. Unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, the school failed a series of inspections, which then triggered the DFE to impose certain actions on the school. And ultimately, it can lead to school closure, but in our particular case, it led to them saying, enough's enough, you need to sort yourselves out. we're putting a restriction in place, which means you can't take in any more students until you sort yourself out. And that's the situation that we find ourselves in. Now, what makes it 10 times harder for us is that an independent school is a fee-paying school. So effectively, the fees that come in from the students is what supports our running costs. So we had a lot of pressure on our shoulders over the last couple of years just to stay alive.
I can imagine. But a lot of the parents will probably be thinking what I'm thinking, which is, okay, alhamdulillah, firstly, congratulations are due to the whole management team and the whole school, mashallah, for pulling itself through this, quite difficult period, right? But a lot of the parents will be thinking, okay, that's great that now you can get new students enrolled, maybe considering enrolling their children, or at least, coming and finding out more information. But before they do that, what guarantee is there, or what steps are being taken by the school, right, to ensure that we don't go forward one step or forward two steps and back one step?
A number of things. With any organisation such as this, with a charity such as ours that is heavily regulated both by the Charity Commission and by DFE, we need to ensure that we've got robust governance procedures in place. So alhamdulillah, we've got a new set of trustees, we've got a governing body, and they give me a difficult time, believe me, they do. So first and foremost, they're regularly coming in with the right skills and specialisms that are needed to come in and check what's going on. Separately, the school has some simple, very basic working principles and ethics that it applies, and that's about quality. We have robust systems. We have clear procedures. Everybody knows what everybody's roles are. When we approach an activity, we approach it with integrity to ensure that we're doing the job properly and accurately. One of our core values is ihsan. When we talk about what is our objective, our vision as a school is to see a society upon ihsan. So by having strong governance, making sure that we have robust systems in place, this inshallah allows us to put us in a position to meet those independent school standards at the very bare minimum. And that's something that I want to reinforce, actually, that we remind ourselves all the time, that meeting these standards is the very bare minimum. Our aspirations go beyond that. Inshallah, the town deserves an amazing, fantastic Islamic schooling provision, and we want to be, along with the other schools, might I say, we want to provide that community with those educational standards that they expect and deserve.
So I'm just reading from your announcement. Since being taken over by new management in July 2018, the school has been on an upward trajectory, and that reflects in terms of this achievement. And the recent Ofsted inspection was February 2020, which is just a few weeks ago, right?
That's right.
Which is now live on the website, confirms that we now meet all the independent school standards, which is fantastic. So what's the category that they've given Olive Tree now?
Okay, so when Ofsted come out, they come out to do a quality check, and that's when they give you your outstanding, good, requires improvement, inadequate. In our particular case, it was purely a compliance check, just to check that we meet the bare minimum. So for now, we remain as meeting all the standards and having a requires improvement rating. But we're anticipating another full inspection, which will specifically focus on the quality provision, possibly by the end of this year, beginning of next year. So that's when we will get a revised rating.
So obvious question, but you think you're ready for that, or you're working towards that, and you will be ready?
I think I'd be lying if I said that we are there, but at the same time I'd be also probably lying if I felt as though I didn't feel an element of confidence. It all depends on. If I can throw the question back to you for a moment, if you don't mind me switching roles.
Why not? If I can answer it, I'll try.
It all depends on what is the measure of success. What is the measure of success? So as a community, does the community want us to provide a provision which meets the standards, but requires improvement? And for them, is that sufficient? I guess for us, no, that doesn't work. For us, we've come into this wholeheartedly with the intention that we want to make this an amazing school. We want to be right up there as being one of the best schools in the country. And some people might think, well, that's an ambitious plan, but that's our ambition. We really want to set us. We came into this with high standards, high expectations. We've thrown a lot of time, energy, money into this, and we're determined to get there. So for us, inshallah, it's a trajectory that we're on that's in the right direction. What might the rating be come the end of the year, January? I'm not sure at the moment, but I certainly hope, and we pray and we're working towards it going up. But it's a journey that we're on, and I think, over the coming years, we've set ourselves a 5 to 7 year strategy, and we hope to be right up there in years to come.
All right, alhamdulillah. I was going to say earlier, when you talk about ambitious and, being one of the best schools, you use the term ihsan, and ihsan, is not a very light term, right? No. It's a very lofty term, right? That, a lot of people just associate with the ibadat, but it's not just about ibadat, it's about ihsan in every matter, right?
That's right.
And in terms of schools, and especially Islamic schools, look, traditionally, historically, there's a big debate in terms of Ofsted versus Islamic schools, and we know that there's a political agenda when it comes to Ofsted on a lot of issues, and they can bring you down on those issues which are more politically motivated and religiously motivated, and coming from the ideological perspective than when it comes to pure academics, right? But when it comes to academics, I'm sure all of our listeners are going to be supporting the view that we want schools which are really excellent, Islamic schools that are really excellent, that are driving, academic excellence, right? And unfortunately, a lot of Islamic schools, I understand the restrictions and the resources and all the challenges that we have, but when we set up Islamic schools, we set ourselves up to face these challenges, right? So that's inevitable. So we can't say we've got a lot of challenges and we've got resource problems. That can't be an excuse, right? So how do we achieve that academic excellence, and do you think that you've got all of those different parameters now in place or getting into place to, so the people, that when they start speaking about Olive Tree now, they're going to start speaking, mashallah, we can see the change, are you getting that kind of feedback from parents at this stage?
Alhamdulillah.
We're on that journey.
Yes, alhamdulillah. One thing's for certain is that when it comes to the education provision, we take it really seriously. It's at the centre of everything that we do, whether it be teaching the national curriculum or whether it be teaching Islamic studies. I thought for a second there you were going to say that we set ourselves up to fail. And actually, in some cases, this is one of the things that early on as a team, the new management team, had to ask ourselves the question, was that the expectations that we've set for ourselves, are they too lofty? Are they too ambitious? Are they achievable? Are we setting ourselves up to fail? Because for us, it was really simple. We're coming into this wholeheartedly committed to only achieve the best, and the best is across the national curriculum and Islamic studies. So we're on that journey at the moment where, alhamdulillah, I can tell you, for sat here right in front of you right now, we have a robust curriculum, both for the national curriculum and Islamic studies. Mashallah, we have some amazing teachers within our group as well, really dedicated, really committed, and they really put a lot into it. We have a management team within the school that's operational. We have external supporters who are coming in regularly, monitoring, advising, training our staff. And alhamdulillah, it can only get better. Okay. We've got some plans for the start of September. And again, it's building on what we have currently at the moment. So inshallah, the plan is to build on that curriculum and to make improvements. If I may, for just a slight second.
We've only got a minute left.
Go for it.
So very quickly, last minute. Okay, what's the plans for Olive Tree now? Enrolment's back open. Great news for the community. What are your plans? What are your numbers that you're targeting?
Okay, so
what's the message?
So the immediate short-term challenges for us or actions for us is to look at enrolment. I've had 4 inquiries since we've got the good news, and alhamdulillah, it's gone really well. So we are working on accommodating the needs of the community with enrolment. At the same time, our most immediate actions are preparing for September.
All right.
In September, we are expecting a huge intake of students. But at the same time, I just want to reassure you and all the listeners that we are not going to just open our doors and flood the school. We're going to make sure we take the right students in, that are appropriate, relevant for the school and those students' needs who we can meet. Right. So inshallah, those are the short-term goals.
Okay, on that note, unfortunately we've run out of time, so Brother Abdul Wadud, Jazakallah khair for joining us. Some great positive news from Olive Tree Primary School, back up for open for business, inshallah ta'ala, come now or come the new academic year, inshallah, yeah?
Inshallah.
All right, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Jazakallah khair for joining us and coming into the studio. All right, so we're going into a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to be discussing Islam and the coronavirus. Don't go away. Last half an hour. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Friday Night Live. This Friday, the 6th of March evening, which is corresponding to, I believe, the 11th of Rajab. Subhanallah, we're already in the last half an hour of the show. I think it's been a very, very interesting. Okay, it's all, well, it's pretty biased for me to say, but I think it's been a very interesting show this evening. Some very interesting conversations, ranging from the US and the Taliban through to Turkey and Syria. So a lot very politically centric conversations in the first hour of the show, and I found it very thoroughly informative. I don't know how you found those conversations. 01582 4818 220 779 4818 222 for your SMS, WhatsApp messages. Would really be interested in hearing your opinions, because I found it very intriguing, very informative, and very, very educational. I want to hear your thoughts. And then the last half an hour we've been discussing, of course, local stories, some very positive stories in terms of Olive Tree Primary School. Jazakallah khair for Brother Abdul Wadud, who is the Olive Tree head teacher, coming in to the studio and also making the attempt to come into the studio. Great to see you in person. But a very positive announcement in terms of the Ofsted restrictions being lifted, and of course the school is open for business, and of course enrolling new students. Right, so earlier I was making, in the opening announcement, I made an interesting comment, or I made a comment rather, that the Jummah khutbah in the masjid that I attended today was the khutbah topic was actually on the coronavirus, right? Islam and coronavirus, Islam and epidemics, Islam and whether it's the plague or whether it's any other virus or whether it's any other health problem. You know, Islam has a very unique position and a unique perspective on addressing these issues, and it's really interesting because over the last couple of weeks, the news has of course been dominated by coronavirus, right? And that's understandable, right? It's understandable because it's having such a huge impact globally. And a lot of people have become, quite nervous about it. A lot of people are asking questions about it, and a lot of people are looking at it, from a perspective of how do we protect ourselves? How do I, ensure? And a lot of people who are probably can be quite casual when it comes to personal hygiene are probably up their game. I have to personally confess that I'm washing my hands a lot more thoroughly than I was previously, right? So there you go. I've made a change to my personal, the way I wash my hands, a lot more thorough. I've looked at these BBC videos in terms of 20, how you should be washing your hands for 20 seconds. I mean, who's got 20 seconds to wash your hands? But I'm sure everyone's now, washing their hands thoroughly. But today's khutbah was very interesting because it, addressed, looking at the virus from a different perspective, not just from a medical perspective, not just from a perspective of how do I keep myself protected, not just from the perspective of how do I, ensure that I don't perhaps go to those places that I can avoid, so that I don't potentially catch this particular virus. But it looked at it from an Islamic perspective. It looked at it from a perspective of how life and how vulnerable life can be. And I think what this virus has put into perspective is that we make all of these fancy plans, but then there's a greater planet than us, right? And it actually puts things into perspective. Certainly now that we see how vulnerable we all are as human beings, right? So that's one perspective. And then also, how does Islam address these preventative measures around, ensuring that the virus doesn't spread? And there's also announcements, of course, last week we addressed this on the radio show, with regards to the Saudi authorities, putting restrictions in terms of the visas that are being issued for pilgrims to go and make Umrah, right? That's been, restricted. There's images going around, there's pictures going around with regards to, the Haram, being, preventative measures being in place, it being, sprayed with, it's been sprayed to ensure that those infections are not, spread. And in fact, there were some pictures going around where there's only very, very few people around the Haram doing the tawaf whilst the authorities take the preventative measures. The khatib that we're trying to get through to today, who's going to address the Islamic issue, is Ustad Aqil Mahmood. Do we have Ustad Aqil Mahmood, or we can't get through to Ustad Aqil Mahmood at the moment? All right, so we've got a couple of GPs that are on the phone that we're going to be speaking to. We've got Dr. Sufyan Ali and we've got Dr. Murtaza Rashid, both GPs. Both, let's get their perspective on things in terms of where we are with the virus and what is the advice that's being given to the masajids, because I believe one of the doctors is from MCB. All right, Dr. Sufyan Ali, Dr. Murtaza Rashid, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Friday Night Live and Inspire FM.
Walaikum salam.
Walaikum salam.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Right, I know one of you is at least involved with the MCB. I don't know if it's Dr. Sufyan or Dr. Murtaza.
I'm involved with British Islamic Medical Association.
Is that...
We published an article for the MCB today.
Right.
And a poster yesterday.
Okay. Is that Dr. Sufyan that's speaking, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So you issued some health advice to MCB to then be issued on to the massages. Is that correct?
Yes, we published an article today.
Right.
For all the masjids.
Okay.
But yeah.
What's give us the gist of the article then, Dr. Sufyan?
So, I think, first of all, the advice that public health are giving, that's one of the kind of main pieces of advice that we're giving to the masjid as well, but just we're trying to make sure we kind of emphasise it to the places of worship. So that was exactly what you were discussing about hygiene, with regards to washing hands, and, washing hands after surfaces, washing hands before eating, not touching your face, it's just been kind of more vigilant with regards to hygiene. The more specific things that we were mentioning to the masjid was with regards to cleanliness of the wudu area, the kind of congregational prayer as well, and that at the moment there's no advice against public events. But we feel that our congregations are mostly elderly, unfortunately, and we know that the virus spreads within crowds. So we're just saying that we should be emphasising to people that come to the masjid to, even if they're mildly unwell, to think about avoiding it unless it's necessary, but just because we don't want to spread the infection, whether it ends up being corona or the flu or any other illness.
Right.
Amongst other things as well, if you want to, just with regards to planning ahead and what you would do if things were to get worse.
Right. Okay. All right. So we can come back onto that. Let me go to Dr. Is it Dr. Murtaza or is it Dr. Mufaza?
Dr. Mufaza.
Mufaza. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I've got the producers have put the naming correctly. Okay, Dr. Mufaza. Okay, Dr. Mufaza. I mean, from your perspective, I mean, I'm looking at the headlines at the moment. Coronavirus globally. Now the statistics are almost 100,000 global infections. Right. No one can undermine the significance and the importance of it, right? I mean, some of my listeners may, just picking up on Dr. Sufyan's point about even if you're not feeling that well, perhaps it's better to avoid going into, massages, for example, into, into places where other people are present. I mean, would you say that that's potentially taking it one step too far, or would you concur with that advice?
The way things have been going with this so far, it's as we all know, there is quite an unknown kind of path that it's taken, and it's a virus that's not been very well known to us. And the way it's spread, it's far more than what any other virus has spread in the recent times. Like we've had the flu viruses, the bird flu and the swine flu, and then we had the SARS and the MERS virus, which were all kind of contained within their, the areas of origin, and didn't spread that far or wasn't that significant, even though they had higher mortality rates. But we can go into that later. But But this has kind of globally gone, and there's various factors obviously that have influenced that, and it's because we're living in the social media era, so we are finding out very quickly, minute by minute, where we find the cases. So that wasn't the case maybe even 10 years ago. So that may be an influencing factor, but we cannot emphasize it enough that it's obviously we need to limit the spread. So if you obviously, and it's not very practical to shut ourselves in the houses as well. So it's just using common sense. So unnecessary travel, unnecessary crowd. If you can avoid it, then that's the best thing you can do.
Right.
Because obviously it is spread like a normal cold or normal flu virus, so avoiding those sort of contacts is probably the best thing to do. But it doesn't really mean that you need to avoid everything or to be really scared or because it causes panic and unnecessary sort of fear.
All right.
But you just have to be sensible about it.
Okay. And from a medical perspective, Dr. Sufyan, I mean, what's been your, as a medic, of course, you've been following the news, you've been following the story with regards to the spread of this virus. What is it different that you're seeing about this particular coronavirus as opposed to any other virals or any other viruses that we know historically? And secondly, maybe also, how are the medics, how are they responding to this? I mean, of course, at the moment, there's no known cure for it. But I'm sure the world's, medics are, working towards something, right? I'm sure there's a huge, kind of pressure on the pharmaceutical industries. There's a huge incentive, of course, in terms of financial economics. What are you reading and what are you seeing that's happening in those areas? It'd be interesting to know.
So to kind of first of all, what you're mentioning about what we're seeing different, if I'm being honest, I would emphasise more that what are the things that we see similar to other viruses.
Right.
And I know Dr. Murtaza mentioned about the kind of rapid spread, which is a worrying thing, but I think we've got a couple of theories about that, like we're talking about social media, but it's actually acting very similar to the flu virus in that it spreads before symptomatic, or it can spread at the very kind of early stages. And so it's kind of duration period within your body as well is a similar type of period. It's going to last a similar amount of time.
Right.
So essentially, there's a lot of similarities. The difference essentially is that it's not the mortality rate is not as high as previous coronaviruses that we know about, for SARS and MERS, but it is a higher mortality rate than flu, based on the information that we have now. And based on information that we have in other countries. But actually, if you were to look at the mortality rate in the UK, it's actually about the same as the flu.
Right.
So there's a lot of similarities, some differences, but the key thing is we don't know enough about it to be able to definitely say that this is exactly what it is and this is what's going to happen. So there's a lot of kind of uncertainties which create a bit of kind of worry and panic sometimes.
Right.
What I would say within the kind of medical field, there's a lot of we don't know yet being said,
right?
And we're looking into it. I think all the medical staff are kind of, from what I've seen, being kind of very vigilant, trying to do the best they can, trying to educate the patients, trying to educate the community, which is exactly what we should be doing. Just about simple measures, the more complicated measures with regards to vaccines and treatment. It will come with time. They're working on it. I think whether it's going to be anytime soon, probably not.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll wait and see.
All right, Dr. Sufyan Ali, thank you very much for your time this evening. Unfortunately, that's about enough time that we've got for this. But we appreciate your time this evening, and thank you very much for joining us on Friday Night Live.
Thank you,
Dr. Sufyan Ali. All right, that was the medics giving us their update and their perspective on things. But of course, I want to focus on the Islamic perspective on coronavirus. And I've got Ustad Aqil Mahmood, who's the Imam and Khatib from Green Lane Masjid. Assalamu alaikum, Ustad, and Jazakallah khair for joining us on Friday Night Live. Jazakallah khair. So I was, alhamdulillah, I was at the Islamic Center today earlier, and I was listening to the khutbah. I found it very interesting, mashallah, and it's a perspective that I suspect a lot of the Muslims in our community perhaps are not looking at from that perspective, right? Maybe there is a thought that is emerging in our minds, right? But a lot of us are looking at it from a medical perspective, very intrigued by what's happening medically, globally. How do we prevent ourselves? Maybe some kind of a fear factor also slightly creeping in. But we've got about 10 minutes. In the last 10 minutes, I want to just open up that conversation to say, hang on, guys. Medically, we see what's happening, and we see the medics are trying to address it. They're giving us the advice in terms of how we prevent and how we kind of isolate and so on and so forth. What we can do as individuals, but there's a wider perspective that we need to look at things, right? From an Islamic perspective, how do we look at it from an Islamic perspective? And perhaps a summary of some of the key points that you actually addressed in the khutbah today will be very pertinent, I think, for our listenership, inshallah. So, in summary, what would be the message that you would give to our listenership when it comes to looking at coronavirus and looking at it from an Islamic perspective?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the khutbah today, we were basically discussing the reality of life and how Allah talks about in the Quran how the inevitability of trials and tribulations that every single human being will be afflicted with in this world.
Yeah.
And Allah talks about how هو الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. He says that He is the one who has created life and death and everything else in between, from illnesses, etc. ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. So He can see, so He can test which one of you is best in terms of deeds. So we're always reminded in terms of the Islamic perspective of death and the inevitability of death and how everyone will, eventually die, and it's just a process that every single human being will go through, Muslim or non-Muslim. But I think when we have these kinds of circumstances and situations where you have viruses and people being afflicted with these kinds of illnesses and dying as a result of these diseases or, these contagious diseases, I think it kind of opens a person's, not I wouldn't say perspective, but it makes a person a bit more aware of the risk of a person possibly dying from these illnesses. But it's something that really we shouldn't really be too surprised about, because ultimately Allah has told us that these are things which will happen to every single individual, just like a person suffers from a flu or from a cold or from any kind of illness or pain that he might go through, even psychological or mental types of illnesses or pain that he might go through, or anguish. This is, just another type of illness that he'll go through. And if a person is afflicted with it, it's more about how he behaves, how he responds.
Okay, so
many times the person is afflicted with an illness and then he just ends up distancing himself from Islam as opposed to practicing Islam. Right,
so Ustad Akhil, I'm going to throw a number of questions at you, inshallah. So if you can just quickly shed light on those, and I'm going to try to get through as many as we can. We've got about 6 minutes, 7 minutes, inshallah. So, all right, trials, tribulations, death, and the vulnerability of life is all put into perspective when we see what's happening globally, right? So automatically, almost, it's inevitable for us to almost start, becoming a bit fear, having that fear factor overtake us, right? Is that inevitable? Is that natural? Is that something that is wrong? And how do we control that? How do we put that into perspective?
I mean, there's different types of fear from an Islamic perspective. There's those types of fear which is unnatural. For example, superstitious, bad luck. If I walk under this ladder, then, something's going to happen to me. I'm going to get bad luck. If a mirror breaks in your house, I'll get 7 years of bad luck.
Yeah.
And you're afraid because of these types of things happening. Of course, they have no basis from an Islamic perspective. But then you have the more natural fears. So a person, for example, being confronted with a lion, on the street, that's going to cause a natural type of fear. Musa alayhi salam in the Quran, he also was afraid when the staff that he was holding turned into a snake.
Yes.
And so Allah said to him, don't be afraid. So it was a natural type of thing. So with diseases and illnesses, a person, it's natural for a person to be afraid of death. And it's not really something which a person is sinful for, because of course, it could be as a result of his faith, as a result of his iman, that he's worried about what may happen in the future. So in terms of, having that fear, again, it's about how one responds when he has that fear.
Right.
So if a person is afraid of this disease, of this illness, and that causes him to basically do things which are contrary to Islam, that's a problem from an Islamic perspective.
Right.
But if he was instead getting closer to Allah, worshipping Allah more, giving charity, for example, giving charity is actually one of those ways in which if a person was afflicted with an illness, those illnesses, Allah could potentially remove them. So it depends on what he does with that fear that he has and that he possesses.
Right. And how do we reconcile that with the qada of Allah and ajal? We know ajal is fixed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know qada is something that is decreed from Allah, and we don't have any control over what Allah has decreed over us, right? So I understand that fear, natural, okay, it's inevitable for a lot of us, as long as it's in the right context. How do we reconcile that with qada and ajal being from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Well, when an individual has this element of fear in his heart of certain things happening, he also has this element of hope.
Yes.
And the scholars, they talk about how there's always this balance between hope and fear. So a person isn't so afraid, like I mentioned, where it ends up disabling him and it prevents him from worshipping Allah and remembering Allah more. At the same time, he's not so hopeful that he loses that element of fear, or maybe he's overconfident, or he thinks his deeds are enough.
Yeah.
So that element that you mentioned of amal, meaning having hope, that's always balanced with fear. So it's about that healthy balance, having a healthy dosage of fear, while at the same time having a healthy dosage of amal and hope at the same time, so that they both counter one another. And some of the scholars, like Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he talked about how their wings, on one side you have the wing of fear, and on the other side you have the wing of hope. And so too much on one side will end up causing you to fall, whereas if they're both balanced, then you'll stay afloat.
All right. Okay. Subhanallah. I actually said ajal, but amal is fine. It's also a very key concept anyway. But don't worry about it. All right. So it's a couple of other quick fire questions for you, inshallah ta'ala. I like the point and the message that we're sending out to the community, that actually all of this, okay, but not only puts things into perspective, but it actually should bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And actually making us recognize and acknowledge all of these factors, increase our ibadat and our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also realize that this is going to be a very key time for sabr, because there are going to be some difficulties, and we're already facing difficulties. We're hearing try to avoid travel, try to really question whether you need to fly out unnecessarily, and that Allahu alam in terms of how this actually translate into the next few days, weeks, months. Allahu alam. Sabr and the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe a couple of words just there to reflect upon those points.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the issue of sabr, because excuse me, in the Quran Allah talks about an individual being tested. Allah says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. That we're going to test you, verily for sure, you're going to be tested بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ, from an element of fear, hunger, وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ, and a loss of wealth, وَالْأَنفُسِ, and a loss of life, which includes like a person becoming sick. And Allah mentions different ways a person is going to be tested. Then Allah says, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, and give glad tidings out of all those people who are going through those tests. Give glad tidings to those who show patience, those who are patient. And then Allah says, الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. When they're afflicted with any kind of calamity from the ones that Allah mentioned, instead of panicking, they'll say instead, to Allah we belong and to Allah we will return.
Right.
So it's this idea of basically a person, like we mentioned, remembering Allah more, realizing it's a test from Allah. Once you recognize something is a test from Allah, then you'll respond accordingly. Sometimes, we go through tests in our lives, and we don't actually think of it as a test. We think of it as, something, a misfortune that we've fallen into, and it's something which we can't benefit from. We don't see the positives from it yet. If we recognize it as a test from Allah, then you could actually respond accordingly. You can get closest to Allah, and you'll be rewarded so long as you're patient, as Allah mentions in this ayah, in this verse.
Subhanallah. Very quickly, we've got about a minute and a half, right? Let's quickly touch upon prevention. Now, prevention is a very much an Islamic, principle when it comes to these kind of plagues, or when it comes to these kind of viruses. Very, very quickly, what's it's the Islamic principle in terms of prevention and guidelines and principle is no different to the medical guidelines that are being issued. Maybe a minute just to spend on summarizing that for us.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, from the guidelines they've mentioned is a person making sure he's washing his hands regularly, and of course as Muslims we're required to perform wudu before we pray, and we pray 5 times a day.
Yeah.
So, at the minimum, I suppose if somebody kept his wudu for some of the prayers, he'd be doing wudu at least 2, maybe 3 or 4, 5 times a day. Also, we have the sunnah of something called tajdeedul wudu, which is renewing your ablution, renewing your wudu.
Yeah.
Even if the person does have wudu, he's encouraged to basically repeat his wudu, and he gets rewarded for that as well. So you're purifying and cleaning yourself, while on top of this you get reward from Allah. Also, the issue of sneezing into a handkerchief or a piece of cloth. We know that the Prophet ﷺ and also the companions, whenever they would sneeze into their clothes or a piece of cloth. They never had handkerchiefs like we do because they weren't wealthy. But the idea is the same. So, these things are things which we've been told to do, but it's something that's from the Sunnah, which is 1400 years old.
Excellent, inshallah. Definitely that tajdeed al-wudu is something that I hope my son's listening to, because every time I tell him to pray, it's time for pray and make wudu, he says, I've already got wudu. So maybe something that he can take away is the tajdeed al-wudu, inshallah ta'ala, and definitely. But just Shaykh, Jazakallah khair for the khutbah today, and Jazakallah khair for coming at a very short notice on the radio. I think is very, very informative, mashallah. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. Otherwise, I'd love to continue talking to you.
No problem.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. Jazakallah khair for joining us. And that was listeners, Ustad Aqil Mahmood, who is of course the Khatib and Imam from Green Lane Masjid, joining us this evening and giving us the Islamic perspective on the coronavirus. MashaAllah, very, very informative. And unfortunately, subhanAllah, we've run out of time. It is the end of the 2-hour show, MashaAllah, and the time has just literally flown by. Until next week, inshallah ta'ala, it is me, Hafiz Sha'ban, on Friday Night Live, signing out. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Why not tune in to our live stream at inspirefm.org and follow and subscribe to our social media platforms at Inspire FM Luton.